What are you looking for is a question that's on my mind this morning. What are you looking for? As you walk into a room, what are you looking for? When you walk into the church this morning, what were you looking for? As you walk into, as you look into the cafeteria, kids, as you go to school, our elementary kids, as you see your buds in the cafeteria, as you go out to recess and you see your buds out on the recess, what are you looking for? As you're at high school and you see your friends in the cafeteria, or maybe other people in the cafeteria, who are you looking for? How are you seeing the room? When you come home from work at night, how do you see the house? When you walk in, how do you see the kitchen? How do you see the bedroom? How do you see the people who are in those places? Oftentimes we find ourselves walking into a space, walking into a room, not really aware of the deeply seated things that we're looking for. My granddaughter, I love saying that. I'm going to say it one more time. My granddaughter, it's amazing when her mom walks into the room and she is close by. There's Drake. She's not close by. She's being a mom. She's being a mom. When we're with Nora, it's amazing how we're all doing like dad's, grandpa stuff or papa stuff. That's who I am. The aunts are doing aunt stuff, Nora, like we're all like really taken with this little one, and this week is like she started crawling, has really started becoming mobile, she's up on, kind of doing this scoot thing, and if you've been there, their lives are about ready to change, so you should be praying for the Bang family. But we're all just mesmerized with Nora. We're all loving her. But as soon as mom walks in the room, you know what happens? It's like mom is the best thing ever. And like all of us are chump change, it's like, not, you guys are not, it's me, really, that's the chump. But it's like as soon as mom walks in, it's like, there's like, that's who I want. That's who I'm after. And of course, it's altogether fitting, obviously the way a young mother will care for her young infant in those tender months. It's a beautiful thing. But Nora, in her heart, when mom walks in the room, that's what I'm looking for. And her heart goes that way, making a hard left turn. This illustration is going to be painful for some. But I was thinking about all of our guys who conceal carry. Well, it's a hard left turn, I told you. I was thinking about, for those who are concealed carry in the room, you don't like sitting in the middle. I mean, I'm not going to point them out, but their backs are against the wall somewhere. And the way those guys see a room, they have a responsibility to make sure that they want to be able to see the room in front of them. That's just, there's something wired in there. The way they see a room, they're thinking about eliminating threats and all those kinds of things. It's like, oh my goodness. The way they walk into the room, like they're bearing a responsibility and a burden upon them. Like they see the room differently, right? Whether you're a young mom, a young grandparent, a young child, or a concealed carry person, I mean, you understand the idea of walking into a room. I was in a church last week up in Minnesota for a conference, a Converge North Central conference, and I went and I was with a room full of pastors. And you guys, there's a whole room full of people, and there was one person who was wearing a red hoodie with a big white N on it, and I knew this guy needs to be my friend. I don't know. This guy needs to be my friend. And so it's amazing how I step into the room and I'm aware there's a Husker fan over there. I need to go be this guy's friend. But as I'm at this church and at this conference, and that's more information on that for another day, but I find myself looking around, looking at technology, looking at lights, looking at how they do things, looking at how they display signage, how they do children's check-in, how they do kiosks, how they do their coffee setting. And I'm aware as I'm looking in, I'm looking for and I'm looking at different things. And I realize that I'm making judgments. I like how they did that. I don't like how they did that. I walk into a space, I didn't go with the intent of making evaluations about what I like and I didn't like. But when I walked into the space, I found myself thinking, I like it, I don't like it. Like there was something in my heart that was saying, I am a consumer of sorts, and I'm making judgments about things as I'm walking into the room. Whether you're a little girl seeing mom in the room, whether you're a concealed carry guy and you're aware of the room, or you walk into a space making these evaluations of what you like and what you don't like, we're all carrying around unseen preferences and unseen burdens that are shaping the way that we're seeing a room. And Jesus exposes this big time in our passage here today. And I pray that I would have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. If you're joining us, we are moving slowly through Mark's gospel. We're going to pick up the story today in Mark chapter 3. Now, before I read, this really marks a kind of a concluding bit to multiple scenes that we've seen about Jesus calling Levi and questions about fasting, him healing the paralytic, Jesus picking grain on the Sabbath. And there's a climax happening here where the Pharisees arrive at a conclusion. Let's pick up the story, Mark chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. And again, Jesus entered the synagogue. And a man was there with a withered hand, and they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And Jesus, he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, did Jesus, grieved at their hardness of heart. And Jesus then said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And the man stretched out his hand, and it was restored. The Pharisees went out then of the synagogue and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him on how to destroy him. To say that this story has reached a fever pitch, is an understatement. They are counseling together to destroy Jesus. How did we get here? Let's go back up to the opening verse. Jesus enters the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. We've said already the synagogue is a place where God's people would gather on the Sabbath for teaching. The temple was in Jerusalem. That's where they would go and make sacrifice for sin and for atonement. But in the synagogue, they would have local people, local Pharisees, scribes that would come who were experts in Torah and would come and teach God's people on how to relate rightly to God by observation of the law. And Jesus had entered synagogue, as was his practice that we've seen in other towns. He's going around the Sea of Galilee, showing up at synagogue and teaching on the Sabbath. Well, Jesus, obviously, as his fame is spreading, he's healed demons, he's forgiving sins, lepers are being healed, cripples are rising to walk again. And now people are coming out to see what Jesus is going to do. And there is, in the synagogue, as Jesus is there is a man with a withered hand. The withered hand, it becomes a very important word in this passage. A withered hand is no match for Jesus, but a withered heart, on the other hand, proves to be a problem for the Pharisees. There's a withered hand. The withered, it literally means lifeless. There's no known cure. It's lacking moisture, and so there's a shriveled up, deformed, small hand. In verse 2, here in Mark 3, It says, they, being the Pharisees, they watched Jesus to see if he was going to heal this man on the Sabbath. Now, this idea for watch is an interesting word. It's not just to look at or to walk in and just like being passive as if we're watching a TV show or something. Oh, I'm just watching this, or I'm just watching birds. Or there is an intention of keeping a mental record. It's this Greek word literally means to watch closely or to observe intently. It's as if they are gathering evidence. They're watching to see. I remember recently doing CPR training, and when you do CPR training, you check the passageway, you administer breaths, and then you open the passageway and you look, and you're looking to see, do I see any heart movements? And so there's an intention. I just want to see signs of the chest rising a little bit. Or when we do the bag and we administer air into the airway, do we see the rib cage expanding? I'm watching closely because this is a matter of life and death. And for those Pharisees, they're watching with that same kind of intention. I want to see if I can see what I'm looking for. They want to see, is Jesus going to heal on the Sabbath? What's interesting is healing, they were considering this to be a form of working on the Sabbath. There are Sabbath rules that come in the law, and then there are interpretations of those laws, and then there are principles and guidelines so that God's people wouldn't violate the law. And so the Pharisees are not looking with grace upon the situation. And it's explained really in that last phrase. They watched to see, and the clausal phrase at the end, so that. Anytime you see a so that in Scripture, we're looking, it's cause. Like what, this is the reason. This is, Mark is writing this. As Peter, whispering in his ear, those Pharisees showed up because they want to catch Jesus doing something wrong. Now, if you're listening, you're like, wait a minute, Jesus doing something wrong. Does Jesus do wrong things? And all God's people would say, no, Jesus doesn't do wrong things. But they want to accuse him of doing something wrong. Are they going to find Jesus doing something wrong? The answer would be no. But they're bringing with them into the situation, they're bringing accusation in their hearts, and they're bringing that into the room. As they walk into the synagogue, they're going to find the spotless, sinless Jesus, and they're going to accuse him, and they're going to find in him something wrong. Is there something wrong in Jesus? No. The something wrong is in their withered heart. They brought that accusation with him. Literally, this idea of accuse is a technical term. It means to gather evidence with the intent of bringing a charge against somebody. The motivation of the Pharisees is to watch Jesus to see if he's going to give them evidence that they can use against him. They brought it into the scene. The accusation, as I've already said, is in their hearts. It always starts in the heart. They went into the synagogue looking for trouble. Now, one observation I just want to make, and I'm grieved at the thought that here are a group of Pharisees going into a synagogue to see Jesus, the great I am, the teacher, the truth, the way, the truth, and the life. And Jesus is there, the one who fulfills all of the law. And Jesus is there to teach on the Scriptures. And rather than listen to him and learn from him and be awed by him, they miss him and they accuse him. It reminds me of the scene where Jesus is before Pilate. And Jesus says, I've come to testify to the truth. And Pilate, with Jesus right in front of him, Pilate says, what is truth? And truth is standing right there in front of him. And Pilate doesn't see it. And here is Jesus, the truth, the teacher. And the Pharisees don't see it. They're where they're there to show up, to hear God's word be taught. And God himself is in their midst, and they don't see it. How often do I walk into a space and I completely miss the work of God in my midst? How often do I walk into a church and I only see lights and tech and children's kiosks? I'm only aware of the temperature of the room, the volume of the music, the style of music, the clothes that people are wearing, and I completely miss the work of God in the hearts of his people. What's sad and what is so true is that these Pharisees find what they're looking for. And this is the way it tends to go. You walk into a room with malice in your heart and you find malice, right? You walk into a room with a conviction and a conclusion already in mind, and there you find it. You were right all along. Not that you're creating meaning or that reality is true, but the malice in your heart is shaping or shadowing a way that you are viewing the situation. Husbands, you're convinced in your own mind that the problem lies with your wife. You come home from work convinced in your own mind that your wife is the reason your relationship is cold. And when you walk through the door at night coming home, it won't take you long to find the evidence you're looking for. Happens in marriage all the time. If you're convinced that your husband is the problem, you're going to find what you're looking for. Here, we live in a broken and fallen world. There is none who do right, no, not one. There is no perfect relationship. There's no perfect church. There's no perfect school. There's no perfect workplace. If you go looking for trouble, you're going to find it. If you go looking for evidences of brokenness, you're going to find it. Not to say that Jesus presents evidence for brokenness, not at all. Keep in mind, they brought that accusation with them in their hearts. And when they walk into the room, they say, see, I'm right. I know as a parent, I've walked into the room far too many times, convinced of motivations before I consider a matter. Scriptures tell me it's wise to listen before I give answers. And too many times I've jumped to conclusions without really looking and seeing. I've walked into a space seeing conflict, concluding, you are in error and you are in error, and there's consequences. I think when the scriptures teach me in Ephesians 6, fathers, don't exasperate your children. One of the ways my children can be exasperated is when I see them through the lens of my already preconceived ideas that they're in the wrong. We do it at church, we do it in marriage, we do it to our kids, we do it at work. We show up to our workplaces convinced that if we had better coworkers, our workplaces wouldn't be so bad. There's an old adage, to a man who only has a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And so if what you have to work with is pessimism, anger, anxiety, judgment, chances are you're going to walk into a room thinking, see, the problem is here, here, and here, all the while realizing there's something withered in my heart. It's as if the Pharisees only have a hammer, or the law is only to be rigidly obeyed, as if the law is the thing itself. They failed to see that the law was pointing to a relationship with God. It's important to note in these stories here that Jesus never decried or minimized Sabbath. He never minimized fasting. He never minimized honoring God in doing away with Torah. No. The law is pointing to something greater than itself. The law is pointing to someone greater than the one who attempts to follow it. The law is like a school teacher, it says in Galatians, leading the student to understand our need for our Messiah, Jesus. So, verse 2 then in Mark chapter 3, they watched Jesus. They wanted to see if he was going to do this thing so they could accuse him. And so Jesus, at this point, here's how Jesus responds. He says to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." Literally, this phrase means come in the middle, come in the midst, to the center. There is something public that's about ready to happen. This could have been, I'll talk to you afterwards, or this could have been a private scenario, but Jesus turns this into a public event. Come in the center, come here. So the man then comes into the center. In verse 4, Jesus says to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm?" Even the strictest observers of the law viewed that saving a life to be ethically good on the Sabbath. Even fighting in a war in defense was permissible, would be okay. It reveals that the Pharisees are straining to get Jesus. They're going beyond normal issues here, and Jesus is exposing it by saying, is it lawful to do good or to do harm? Equating healing this man with a withered hand. Would it be good to extend mercy and to heal? Or should we do harm? That would be perceived as passivity of doing nothing. He takes it a step farther. Would it be lawful to save a life or to kill? And their response, of course, is silence. Silence because they stand convicted, stand exposed. You see, the first part of the question, is it lawful to do good or to do harm? Jesus is referring to the activity right in front of him. Should I do good to this man? Or should I speak to do good? Simply, he's going to offer a prayer of be healed. Or to do harm. Of course, the response is it's lawful to do good. And Jesus, the second part of it, he says, is it lawful to save life or to kill it? The irony of the statement is, at the end of the passage, the Pharisees decide to destroy. So on the very day that they exercise judgment on Jesus to protect life and value life, they themselves are using their voices and their energy to destroy life, guilty of the very Sabbath they are claiming to protect. Jesus then, in verse 5, looks around. Now, I've asked, what do you see when you walk into a room? What do you see when you walk into the cafeteria? What do you see when you walk into a church building? When you walk into the kitchen? What do you see when you walk into the break room? I wonder, Jesus, what did you see when you looked? Jesus looks around at them, and he has anger. This is three words here that describe vividly the posture of Jesus. One is he looked at them with anger and with grief at their hardness of heart. There is a righteous anger that is being modified by this clause. So if you look at, he looked at them with anger, comma, grieved at their hardness of heart, comma, that clause, grieved with their hardness of heart, is modifying the way he is looking. It describes his anger. It's not an anger like a sinful anger that you and I, as being fallen people, might have, but his anger is being described by the posture of his heart that is saddened and grieved at the witheredness and the hardness of the hearts of the people who are experts in the law. The heart, we always want to come back to this. It's not just a pumper of blood to get to the whole body. The heart is the place or the seat of will. It's the place where emotion sits. It's the place where decisions get made. We call it where volition and emotion, the core of who you are. For those Pharisees, there was a hardness and a coldness and a witheredness to their own hearts, and this grieved Jesus. Paul uses the exact same phrase, referring to the Gentiles in Ephesians 4:18. He says Paul is writing to the church. It says, the Gentiles, they were darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that's in them due to their hardness of heart. He's here, Paul, in Ephesians, is describing Gentiles. We come back into Mark. Jesus is using the phrase to describe the Jews. Jew or Gentile, doesn't matter who you are. This is a condition of mankind, man or woman, child or adult. The hardness of heart is something that all of humanity struggles with, and we need the grace and the love of God to melt and to soften and to restore and to bring to life the death that is in our hearts. The place where we make decisions, the place where we understand love, where we understand anger, where we understand desire, where the place of thought in our soul. And in that moment, Jesus then does something. He, seeing the posture of the Pharisees and their hardness of heart, Jesus has a decision to make. And this, for me, so if we're like, who do we want to be like? Do we want to be like Pharisee? No. Do we want to be like Jesus? Yes. Well, how does Jesus respond to this? Jesus does not let the hardness of heart of other people in the room derail him from his purpose in ministry. Jesus does not let the sinful actions of others dictate his next move. Jesus does not forfeit his purpose because other people in the room are acting with accusation, bitterness, and anger. Grieved at the sin in the room, Jesus continues with mission, and that's to extend mercy and grace to the marginalized. The man with a withered hand. Come, stretch out your hand. And so the man stretches it out, and his hand was restored. Again, Jesus does not let the pessimism and false assumptions dictate or determine his next move. He is not intimidated or distracted. Rather, eyes on the Father and a heart to the lost, Jesus has come to proclaim the gospel. And that doesn't change no matter who's in the room. That's his mission. Now, the Pharisees, they went out immediately, held counsel with the Herodians against him on how to destroy him. Psalm 2:2 says this as we go back into the Psalms. Josh, did I put verse 1 in there as well? Thank you. The question comes from the Psalms. Why do the nations rage? Why do the peoples plot in vain? Going on to verse 2. The kings of the earth, they set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. Now, so you see all the way back in the Psalms, you see that the nations take counsel together and rulers take counsel with the nations. Then we come back into Mark's gospel. We have Pharisees taking counsel with Herodians. That is like oil and water. Well, when you share a common enemy, it's amazing the kind of friends you can make. You've heard it said, misery loves company. Well, Herod and his family, they weren't too keen on John the Baptist, having John arrested and ultimately going to have John the Baptist beheaded, all for display, to silence the voice of conviction. Jesus being in with John the Baptist, all of a sudden the Pharisees find an unlikely bedfellow, so to speak. Common enemies, they say, makes odd bedfellows. And here the Herodians and the Pharisees, they counsel together. And later on, ultimately becomes a catalyst in the crucifixion of Jesus, as further on this connection is only deepened and strengthened as the story moves on. But what we can say definitively is from this point on, they have made a decision. We're going to destroy Jesus. And every step that Jesus takes here forward is done in the shadow of the cross. Every healing, every teaching, every lesson, every town he goes to, knowing that his path is leading towards his own crucifixion. What's interesting about the word destroy in verse 6, the Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him on how to destroy him. Mark used this same word in the previous chapter on what happens to old wineskins that get new wine. Destroys them. The word is used to describe the old, inflexible wineskin. So what do we do with this? Well, all along, my hope is that there have been applications all along the way. My encouragement for my own heart, for my family, and for us church would be to hear the words of Christ in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 7, verse 3, Jesus says in teaching, he says, why do you look at the speck that's in your brother's eye and you don't notice the log that's in your own eye? Jesus, he's teaching his discipleship because you realize when you walk into the break room, when you walk into the church room, when you walk into the kitchen room, every room you walk into, you have to be aware that you're seeing the world with something in your eye. You're going to see specks, yes. But man, you've got to take the log out of your eye in order to see clearly the world around you. So the disciples know this, that we've got to change the way we see one another. We've got to change the lens through which we are viewing the world around us. The Apostle Paul, in writing to the church in Corinth, in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, one of my most favorite chapters of Scripture, favorite handful of chapters in Scripture, Jesus says, I'll hit that in just a second there, Josh. Jesus says at the end of chapter 4, he says, outwardly we're wasting away, but inside, the part you don't see, we're being renewed day by day. And then when you turn to the beginning of chapter 5, Jesus or Paul says, man, when we approach death is like these earthly tents are being put away, and we're naked, and then we're clothed in our heavenly dwelling. And then he says, so we walk by faith, not by sight. And then he continues to go, so in our faith, we make it our aim to please God. And then he arrives at this statement here, just a few verses later in verse 16. He says, so from now on, therefore, we regard no one according to the flesh. In other words, we regard or we don't look at people according to the flesh. I'm not looking at you according to the flesh, what I see, what I smell, what I hear. I'm not going to regard you according to the flesh. Even though we once regarded Christ according to the flesh, we regard him thus no longer. What they're saying is we just looked at Jesus according to the flesh. This is a carpenter who came out of Nazareth. Who is this guy? We regard him according to the flesh. But our eyes were opened, and we realized, oh my goodness, in the very next verse, I don't have it, but if anyone's in Christ, he's a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. And then we're ambassadors of that news. We get to talk about how anybody in Christ is made new, that the old is gone, the new has come. So the challenge then is when we walk into the room, the church room or the lunch room or the school room or the locker room, that we would look in that room and we would see souls. That we wouldn't see fourth graders or eighth graders or Hawkeye fans or Cyclone fans, Republicans or Democrats, or we wouldn't see Baptists or Lutherans, but we would see humans. We would see image bearers. That we would see hearts. We would see souls of people in front of us. When you walk into a room, what do you see? I got to take the log out of my eye. I don't want to regard you according to the flesh. Oh Lord, would you open my eyes that I could see you, that I could see the world around that you have made. That I don't want to be in my own tribe, hanging out with people in my own tribe. That I want to be governed by truth, to see the way things really are. I don't want to walk into a room with accusation or judgment or preference and find it and say, that person agrees with me, I deal with them. Or that person disagrees with me, I'm anti-them. Proverbs 22, verse 9, there's a verse that I'd love to share. This is a great application for us, I believe. Now, some of you have the ESV. We use the ESV English Standard Version. If you have the NIV, it's going to say whoever is generous to the poor. The literal, the King James Version also uses the word bountiful. But the idea here is whoever looks with bounty or has a bountiful eye, who looks with bounty will be blessed. Why? Because he shares his bread with the poor. The literal idea is you see with generosity of resource and generosity of spirit to the people around you. Who? The poor, the needy, the man with a withered hand, the leprous man, the paralytic man who they lower through the roof. Jesus looks upon the poor of spirit with a bountiful eye. And the work of the Lord is blessed. He is the one who is planted by streams of water. He is the one who bears the fruit. He is the one we want to be like. And I want to have an eye like Jesus who would look upon the poor and the marginalized, even in the synagogue, and not be so consumed with my preferences being met that I would say, I want to see Jesus moving in our community, and I want to join him in what he is doing, and I want to see him in the world that he has created with bountiful generosity of time and resource and spirit. So our response is a response of prayer. Music team, if you would want to come up. I don't even want to say music team. Daughters, would you guys, my girls, would you guys come back? Church, I would like for you to stand. Hey, kiddos, when you go to school tomorrow, I would love to encourage, whether that school is around your kitchen table or whether that school is in Lake Mills or in Gardner or here in Forest City, when you go to school tomorrow, I want you to think about this song that we're about ready to sing. We're not going to sing it quite yet, but it goes, open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. So when you go to school tomorrow, that would be the song you sing. Jesus, would you open my eyes because I want to see you? You see your friends sitting at a table. Do you see the person sitting alone? Do you see the kids sitting alone who need a friend? Would you see the world with a bountiful eye and give yourself to love those friends on the margins who don't have anybody to sit with? Kids, don't be worried about withered hearts that are going to judge the people you sit with. Go love the poor in spirit. Go love the kids who don't have anybody to play with at recess. Men, women, as you enter into the workforce and you go to work, there's people at work with withered hearts and withered hands. When you walk into work tomorrow, would you walk in with this song? Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. I want to see you. And you're going to have habits of falling into the same patterns, but say, God, show me. I want to see you at work in this place today. And I want to be moved by your grace to love the poor in spirit around me. I want to see the world with a bountiful eye. When you walk into church, that we don't see the brick and mortar, but Jesus, we want to see you. Can we sing this song together? And men and women, when we see one another as husbands and wives, and you think you see one thing, but before you engage in that conflict, you would say, open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. Jesus, I want to see you. Let's sing together.